In this video, we're going to talk about how evidence is suppressed in criminal cases in Indiana. About me, my name's Nathan Vining. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Indiana, and I represent people in criminal cases throughout the state and have a lot of experience with suppression of evidence and can explain to you what to look for with evidence suppression and how it works in Indiana. So what is evidence suppression? Basically, there are certain times where your rights are violated, and they're violated to a degree that evidence that was found through the violation should be suppressed, which means that the state can't use it at trial against you. A lot of times this involves illegal searches, illegal or unreasonable traffic stops. It can also involve coerced confessions or having your statements taken without having your rights read. Ultimately, there's a lot of ways that evidence can be suppressed, and an attorney needs to walk you through what suppression issues may be there in your case, but we're going to talk about a few of those today. So we're going to get right into this. Here's an example of what suppression looks like. Here, there's a case, it's a juvenile case, where basically the officers talked to the mom and the child. They said, we want to interview the child. Everyone agreed, but a while into the interview, the child decided, I want my mom. Asked the officers to talk to his mom, but the officers actually kept interviewing the child rather than getting his mom. That created a suppression issue at the trial because the juvenile had a right to have a parent accessible during any interviews. And because the child asked for his mom and the police continued to interview him rather than getting his mom, that led to a suppression issue, and we filed a motion to suppress. Sometimes it can ultimately lead to the dismissal of the case before you even have a suppression hearing, because a lot of times what that does is the state will then negotiate with you and discuss what the suppression issue is, and sometimes they do concede that there was a wrongful search, seizure, or some kind of issue. So suppression can oftentimes be a way to talk to the state and work out issues, but if the state wouldn't have dismissed, we ultimately would have had a hearing over this, and it would have been a really good suppression issue for a hearing. Here's another example from a suppression motion. Here, this is a case involving officers stopping a vehicle and ultimately finding some drugs, syringes, and other items. The issue here is that the officer, basically the car was stopped. It wasn't like an active traffic stop. People just called in suspicious activity, and the officers approached to investigate. Here, we argued it was an illegal detention. A lot of times, if you're not free to leave, at that point it's a custodial interrogation. And ultimately what we argued is that there was no reason for the officers to stop and detain these individuals because there was no evidence of any illegal activity, thus creating a suppression issue. The officers just can't stop and detain somebody for no reason. They have to have reasonable suspicion that there's illegal activity. And the argument here is that the person wasn't acting suspicious. They were just parked in a parking lot. There's none of that reasonable suspicion here to justify the unlawful detention. And here we filed a motion to suppress. And here's another similar one. Ultimately involves a traffic stop and the detention of the people. We didn't feel that there was enough reasonable suspicion for the officers to stop and detain these individuals, and any evidence found as a result of that illegal search should have been suppressed. So these are the kinds of things that you look at when you're looking at a motion to suppress. There's all sorts of rights that can bring in suppression issues, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and then also there's the exclusionary rule. So ultimately, if evidence is obtained against you that was illegally obtained in violation of your rights, you can argue that it should be suppressed and excluded from any evidence at trial. So I think we talked about this, but common grounds for suppression would be unlawful searches, coerced confessions. Sometimes there's Miranda violations where you weren't read your rights, but you were interviewed. Things like that. So there's a lot of common grounds, and then there's the exclusionary rule where if your rights were violated, it shouldn't be used against you in a trial. So if you have the suppression issue, how it works, ultimately your attorney would file a motion to suppress. Then the court typically would set it for a hearing where you would have essentially a mini trial where you would put forward evidence to justify, or at least to show why this was legally obtained. So it would involve calling the officers, having them explain why there was a traffic stop or how they came in contact with the defendant, and then ultimately argue why that contact was illegal or search was illegal or what happened that justifies that suppression of evidence. And then from there, a lot of times the judge will take the matter under advisement and then issue a ruling with an explanation and factual findings to justify why they did or did not suppress. And then those also oftentimes will create, if they don't rule in your favor, it can create issues for appeal in terms of if you disagree with the judge's legal ruling, you can then appeal that and argue based on different law and facts why you think the judge got it wrong. So These things are actually very complicated. It's very nuanced. There's a lot of issues to look for. There's a lot of case law and authority and years of precedent and decisions, both in the state of Indiana level as well as national level. So it's important to get an attorney if you believe there's suppression issues present. And even if you don't believe there's suppression issues, you should still talk to an attorney because there's a lot of things that you may not know about that we would look for. So it's important to talk to an attorney. So if you have questions about a criminal case here in Indiana and you believe your rights were violated, and even if you don't believe your rights were violated, definitely get help because it's a very complicated area, but it's also something that's very important because if your rights were violated, you should move to suppress and argue that the evidence shouldn't be used against you. So here's my number. Again, my name's Nathan Vining. Call or text. I'd be happy to review your case. We do cases throughout Indiana, and we're very available to talk.